I think this is definitely something that is very new and that hasn't been done before. Yes.
I think what we're doing right now is the biggest leap forward in the development of Appwrite.
All those ideas are pretty crazy.
We want the developers to have a frictionless process from idea to having something in production.
We've noticed that for a lot of developers, it's really, overwhelming to manage all their integrations.
We didn't want them to jump around between different products, different tools.
Multiple billing cycles, API keys, database keys.
So Appwrite has always been about really simplifying the backends, and with this move,
We're completing the biggest missing piece that Appwrite developer had.
it just really feels like a stepping stone into a new Appwrite era.
The fact that we're doing that is going to be a big deal, and it's going to be a completely different experience for people.
Yeah, I would say we're now backend as a service, but with as well.
Hello. Welcome to day 3 of Init 3. I see someone called it Init Season 3. I like that actually. Seek Extreme. Everybody, let's take a minute to actually interact with the chat a little bit. Let's all say where we're from, say hello. I feel like these last 2 days, we jumped into it a little bit fast, and I want to make sure to acknowledge you all. This is supposed to be a celebration. I know we have a couple of exciting events coming up where we're going to be a little bit more engaged with the audience, but I'm glad to see everyone here in the chat though. Aditya, hello, Nishant, Tessa, Ebenezer. So tomorrow we have a very exciting event, and I just want to give a little preview to that, and I want to make sure that we're aware of what's happening because we have some very special guests. Tomorrow, you'll see it on our channel. We have Quincy from Free Code Camp, we have Danny Thompson and Leon Noel, and that's going to be a fun conversation. We don't know how long that's going to go. It might go over an hour. I'll have to see how much time they all have, but we have 3 industry experts. I'm sure most people here know who at least one of those people are. Quincy from Free Code Camp, everybody should know him, has had a lot of impact on people's lives and has impacted more people than we can really imagine. So it's going to be a great conversation. Make sure to add the notification bell. Make sure you don't miss that stream because it's going to be a lot of fun. So let's see. Oh, we have 2 Nishants here. Okay. We have Steven who's in backstage. He's excited to see all the stars tomorrow. Aditya, excited to hear from Quincy, Danny, and Leon. Jade here is in the chat. Awesome. By the way, Jade is the designer that makes everything look good, including my slides today. So I'm super thankful for all the thumbnails, all the work that she does last minute. I couldn't do it without her. We have Shirag here. Awesome. Thanks for saying hello, everybody. So we are just going to dive into it. Today is demo day, but I'm also going to present what was announced today because we didn't have an official video for it. This was something that was added last minute. So I'm going to recap it. I know it's on the official init page, so you can read about it there, but we're going to get into it here and we'll actually do a full presentation on that. So I just want to make sure my slides are ready. And today's announcement was about improving the developer experience. Now, when we're building our applications, we all want a smooth developer experience, and anything that interrupts that process that can take us out of the flow state can be a real hindrance on what we're trying to do. We all know in today's world where we have TikTok, Instagram, YouTube Shorts, everything is distracting us and fighting for our attention. And when we're building, we need to be in that focus mode. And the last thing we want is to be in flow state and have something stop that process. So I want to bring up a little scenario here, and I'm going to share my screen. I forgot to do that. Let's start here. Let's say we're building our application, and in this case, we are building this beautiful login form, right? And we're working on our application. We add the form in, we sign in because as we're building, we want to test our own application. And anytime we submit this form, we call the create email password session method. Now we're using Appwrite, so this is an Appwrite method with the web SDK. It hits a certain API endpoint and we log in, everything seems to work fine. Now, we don't quite like the functionality. So what we do is we delete the session, we log out, and then we try it again. And we all know as developers, we rather than measure twice and cut once, we just cut a bunch of times, right? So we just like to iterate on the process and see if we can brute force our way in. Now, on the 10th request, we're still in flow state, but all of a sudden we see this error in the console. Now, we got rate limited here, right? So every endpoint within Appwrite has certain rate limits, at least the post request, anything outside of a GET request usually has some kind of rate limit. And each endpoint has different limits set. So in this case, the limit was 10 requests per hour, so 60 minutes. And this is a good thing because if a user is trying to log in more than 10 times or create more than 10 sessions, they're usually doing something malicious. So we want to stop that, right? So this is a good thing that this is happening. But in that development process, this is a problem. So we would prefer to not have this issue when we're building and not take us out of our flow state. Now, other endpoints that might have this issue are the create document method. So this calls a certain endpoint. And in this case, it's a limit of 120 requests per minute. Again, in a normal application, you probably wouldn't send more than 120 post requests per minute, but we're developers, we do things that don't necessarily make sense, and it's out of that normal scope of how someone would use our application. So we want a solution for this, and we want to have more control and flexibility to not have to run into these issues as developers. And that's what today's announcement solves. We've announced dev keys, and this allows us to bypass rate limits and CORS errors in the development process when we're using client SDKs. So the web SDK, for example, when we're using those SDKs, we want to be able to avoid these so we have full flexibility and not be limited because we hit a certain endpoint too many times. So this gives us more control and we're able to avoid this limitation. Now, how do you use dev keys and how do you create them? Well, when you're in your console, you can create a dev key next to that API keys tab. So it's going to be in your console. You would create it just like you would an API key. You set a limit on it. So you want to make sure that it expires after 1, 7, or 30 days. Ideally, it's short-lived. And you get that key, and you can now use this on the client side. So within the client SDK, whenever you initiate your client SDK, where you set your endpoint, your project ID, and perform all these configurations here, you can now add in your dev key, and this is what bypasses everything and gives you full control. Now, one thing I wanted to know about dev keys is that when you're using them, you are technically taking off those safeguards, right? Because those rate limits are there for a reason. They're there to protect you. When you're using dev keys, they're no longer there. So you want to make sure you never use these in production. You want to make sure you never accidentally push that code. And ideally, that token is short-lived. So if you do happen to do that, hopefully it expires before anything can happen to your website. So that's dev keys in a nutshell. That's today's announcement. Read the articles. They're linked up in the video description. That's all linked up below. So make sure to check that out. And we will be coming out with full tutorials on this if you want to see how to actually integrate it. But the process should be pretty simple, but those videos will have more details. So I'm going to go ahead and remove my screen here, and I'm going to bring up Steven to the stage. And Steven has a presentation for us. Steven, let's make sure you're unmuted. And
Hello.
what are we going to talk about today?
Hey, hello everyone. Today we are talking about sites and Flutter. Before going into that, Dennis, thanks for talking about dev keys. Thanks for that quick intro. Definitely something I'm really excited and happy to have. Especially with cloud, a lot of people have been jumping on, trying Appwrite out, building with Appwrite, and I've seen countless times about people running into those rate limit problems during development. And it was something that we've heard very, very, very often. And so I'm really happy now that this is finally released for people so that people can, like you said, stay in that flow state, be able to continue development and whatnot, and not have that impact them. So really, really happy to have that out.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about it too. My example, the one that actually happened to me before, was coding at 2 a.m. and then I see that I have to basically wait an hour, and I'm like, do I go to bed or do I go take a walk and do something else? And while I do like that it's encouraging me to, go touch grass, I would rather not have my code dictate my life.
Exactly. A bunch of people coming on like, what? I have to wait an hour now to try again.
Yep.
So yeah, very cool. But yeah, today I'm going to be talking about Flutter and Appwrite sites. So let me see here. Let's go into this. So we made this announcement yesterday. Well, we didn't talk about it on stream or anything yesterday, but we with Appwrite sites we support Flutter Web, and this is really big as compared to our competitors or so because um, not a lot of our competitors support Flutter Web out of the box. I know when I was starting to work with Flutter, I wanted to deploy something on a static hosting provider, and there were a lot of hoops that I had to jump around to get it to work. And because we have such a large Flutter community, I think it's really great that we really thought about this beforehand and made sure that the experience for Flutter developers as well was good on Appwrite sites. So we had this announcement yesterday, basically talking about how we support Flutter Web. Like I said, it's out of the box. There's no extra stuff. Why Flutter Web though? Why do I need to add support for web when I'm making my Flutter app? I mostly make Flutter mobile apps because I like the mobile experience. I like having a dedicated app for when I'm on my phone, authentication and whatnot, the sessions there, this dedicated experience. But there are occasions where I have to do something outside of the app. So like mentioned here, email verification, password resets. Email verification is very important, and we do that via email, right?
Steven, I hate to interrupt. Could we zoom in a little bit? We want to make sure we're
Yeah.
also able to read that a little bit better. Yeah, that's perfect.
Cool. Thanks. Email verification. So for my apps, I want to make sure that people are verified. So in the mobile app, I'll kick off the flow, and within Appwrite, the flow is to send the user an email, and so only the user who owns that email address will have access to that. So they click on the link in the email, and where is it going to go? I didn't really want to implement deep linking. There's other potential issues and so with deep linking as well. What if they don't have the mobile app where they're opening the email? So I wanted to have a web page that's very simple to be able to handle email verification. And like I said, when I was trying to do this with the other providers, there was a lot of hoops that I had to jump through. So very excited to finally have this, finally have sites, and then also for sites to support Flutter Web. So I wanted to demo a little bit about this today. Before jumping into that, though, I did want to give a shout out to Nishant for all of his work done on Flutterflow. He worked on an integration to help developers be able to build with Appwrite faster on Flutterflow. And so this was announced a little bit before, but if you haven't checked it out, on our integrations page, we have a guide for the integration that we have. We have this authentication kit. So you can go through this to see in detail, but I'll try to run through it a little quickly. So you can dive into the auth kit here, and let me zoom in just a little bit.
And just to be clear, that you said this is Flutterflow, right?
Yes, correct. Flutterflow.
For a non-Flutter developer, can you summarize that? Flutterflow versus Flutter, because that can sound confusing to me even.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for bringing that up. So Flutterflow is kind of a low-code tool that you can use to build Flutter applications. So you go to their site, and there's a bunch of drag and drop where you can drag components together And one thing that's really nice is that they do allow you to dive into the code as well and see what the underlying code is. You can export that code, push it to GitHub and whatnot. So it's not totally a no code. I don't really like no code solutions because I like having that access to the source code as well. So Flutterflow gives you that nice in between where you can do stuff really fast. Um, yeah, I have mentioned so something like Webflow, but a bit better. Definitely geared towards a Flutter. So especially digging into the code and whatnot, you'll see a lot of the Flutter code. So a Flutter developer is able to really understand how it all fits together and whatnot. So yeah, we built this because a lot of people came to us and were trying to build on Flutterflow, trying to connect to Appwrite, but they couldn't use the SDK as easily because Flutterflow has these drag and drop components, and our SDK is, you write code to do it. So we built this to help with the authentication side of things. And if this goes well and whatnot, we'll continue to build out other database kit and other stuff as well. So to use this, you can just add it into your Flutterflow project as a project dependency, and then you have access to different components or so to drag and drop and use within your project. On our integration doc, we also mention a demo app. This is a really good way to be able to check out a Flutterflow project that uses the integration library. So you can take a look at that as well. Let me jump into the auth kit itself. And I will try to zoom in a bit. Flutterflow.
I was going to say, that's definitely going to need some zooming. Hopefully you can move one of those tabs because that's a lot of code.
Yeah.
Do you have a widescreen by any chance? It seems like you're like in horizontal mode.
Yeah. Let me see if I can.
That seems better. Yeah, because there we go. Okay, so it's taking up more of the screen. That's a million times better.
I have like a 4K screen that
Yeah, so for you it's easy to see. A lot of people watch this on their phones. They're like squinting.
Yeah. Cool. So this is the auth kit just to give an idea about what it is underneath. So the auth kit has some custom actions that you can drag and drop into your code. So these are essentially wrappers around our SDK because you wouldn't be writing the actual code in Flutterflow. You'd be dragging and drop different things. So this kind of drags and drop. So for example, here, get current user calls our account.get and then returns the data back, does a few other things as well. We've tried to do a lot of error handling in this to try to give developers a lot more insight into what's going wrong if something does go wrong. So there's some of that as well. But so there's a bunch of these actions that you can drag and drop into your code, into your project, like sign in with email and stuff like that. So if I jump over to a project, so this is a project as if you are building a app using Flutterflow. This one specifically is our demo. So from the integrations documentation that we have, I mentioned that we have this demo app. You can open this and then clone it, and then that will give you this demo app. So if I jump over to project dependencies, you can see here that I have the Appwrite Authentication Kit installed as a dependency for this app. So if you were building out your own, you would also search through here to find the authentication kit, and then you can add that to your project. The only configuration you need to do for this is if you go click on the view details right here, there are library values. So this is where you fill in the endpoint and project ID like you typically would when you're building a Flutter app. And then there's some insights as well for the different things that this library provides. An app state, which this is where we store the user after calling account.get. Typically, when you're building a Flutter application, you would call account.get after they're logged in, store it in your app state, and then use that in the application, to show maybe their avatar icon on the top right, or to show them the logged in page instead of the sign in page, stuff like that. So in this project, if I switch over to dashboard, welcome. So
Yeah, this is the part that I'd want to see right here. How does that work under the hood?
yeah. So what do we do when we're building a app connected to Appwrite? Typically, what we do is when the app first loads, we need to initialize the client. We need to call account.get to check if the user signed in before or not. And then we can redirect them to wherever they need to go. And so this is exactly what's going on in this project. This welcome screen is the first screen that they get to when they first open the app. So this is Flutterflow's drag and drop interface. You drag in different actions and whatnot. So you can see here that this first action is initialize. This comes from our Appwrite auth kit. So we initialize, this calls account.get, or this initializes the client, calls account.get, and then if that's successful, we redirect to the dashboard. Otherwise, do something else if there's some sort of error or whatnot. And then another example of how you would use the auth kit is on the login page. If I go here for the sign in, when they click that sign in button, this is what triggers. It triggers sign in with email. And this is, again, that action that comes from the auth kit. All I had to do was drag that action over onto this editor, and then that's it. I don't need to write any other code. It tells me if this was successful. If it was successful, I'll redirect the user to the dashboard. Otherwise, show some sort of error or something like that. And so that's how you would use the kit in your Flutterflow project. Now, how does this fit into sites? How does that fit into what we're talking today about building Flutterflow with Flutter on Appwrite sites? With this project, what I can do is push this to GitHub. Flutterflow has GitHub integration. So if I go down to GitHub here, I've linked this project to my GitHub repository. And so when I push to the repository, it goes over here into this Flutterflow branch. And so here it's on GitHub now. And because with Appwrite sites, we have the GitHub integration, I can connect to this repository and then deploy my site Appwrite. The only thing that you kind of have to keep in mind or so, for some reason, Flutterflow hard codes the dependencies. They pin it to a certain version, and you might run into issues with different versions of Flutter and whatnot. So if I switch over to my main branch, which takes the Flutterflow branch and does some additional modifications to it, I've just made it so that I don't pin it to the certain version. I take up to a certain version for the certain dependencies. And so let's jump right over to Appwrite now. So I've built this app, I've pushed it to GitHub, deploying it onto sites now. So here I am in my Appwrite project. I just go through the flow, create a site. Since this is already on GitHub, I'll just connect this to a existing repository. I can see my Flutterflow auth demo repository here. Let's connect to that. So Appwrite sites will pull some information about the repository, and you can see here that it detected that this is a Flutter. Do I need to zoom in a little bit? Let me zoom in just a little bit more. It's detected that this repository is a Flutter project. And then in addition to that, it has populated here the default commands, flutter pub get to install dependencies, the build command. Typically, we deploy using release flag, and we point to our main, which this is the default main if you're building a Flutter app. And the output by default is this build web folder. Let me just make sure to specify main for my branch. And then I can go ahead and deploy. And it starts to build. You can watch this as it goes, as it pulls the dependencies and whatnot. So this is the nice thing about Flutter with Appwrite sites, is that this build is going to be a lot faster. I mentioned before about the hoops and whatnot that we had to jump through, that I had to jump through when I was trying to deploy onto some of the other other hosting providers, is they don't come with Flutter. They don't have Flutter built in. It's typically like a node-based runtime. So the workaround that you typically find when you look online on how to deploy onto these other providers is you first have to download the Flutter SDK. That includes Dart, the Flutter framework and whatnot. Install that into the machine, and then you can go and build. So it's quite annoying to have to do that and wait for the download, installation, and everything. Versus on Appwrite sites, it goes straight into installing the dependencies and whatnot, because it's using a runtime that already has everything that's needed to do the installation and whatnot. So that's a really nice thing about deploying a Flutter web app, Flutter sites. So this is still going, this is still processing, but I can jump over to here. So this is what I had been around with earlier to and whatnot. So once the build finishes, you'll see this here. Congratulations, your Flutter web app has been deployed. So I can click on that to open up the deployment. See if I zoom in.
So this is a live URL, right? That's deployed.
Yep, exactly.
See
It's
it
a
on the
live
QA
URL.
server.
So I can sign in, enter my email. And sign in. And here is that dashboard that shows that I'm successfully logged in. This is the name, email, and user ID. And there it is. That is super easy, super quick to just deploy a Flutter web app onto sites. I'm just running through a few quick steps. Most of the stuff is populated for you, and you just hit it and go. So that is
Nice.
it.
I got a few questions if you're ready.
Yeah.
So we had a question about Flutter and Flutterflow and the difference. I've never used Flutter. I've seen it before, but not enough to really understand what's going on. From Flutterflow, what it seems like happened is this was all bundled into just Flutter code, right? Because the question that we got in the chat was, how do we deploy, or will there be an example of a Flutter website without Flutterflow? Is that process the same? Because it seems like Flutterflow just generates Flutter code, goes into the GitHub repo, and you push that. So is there any difference between a Flutter application and a Flutterflow application as a final product?
No difference at all. So yeah, with
Nice.
Flutterflow, they generate a they give you all the code that's generated. So, if
So
you
it's
if you
literally
look into it,
generating the same thing. Okay, that makes perfect sense.
yeah, they have some stuff that they've auto-generated. Like this is, their kind of auto-generated code that they add onto it. But if I was building a Flutter web app myself, um, I'd have the same thing. I'd have a bunch of this Flutter code on a GitHub repository, and so it's the same. You could do it with a regular Flutter web app as well.
So whoever had the question, if you were building a Flutter app, you'd build it locally, push it to GitHub, exactly what you just saw Steven do, and the rest of the process will be the same. Now, if you're curious about that, we do have sites, videos already on the channel. So the process is not going to change at all. So as long as you know how to deploy a website through a GitHub repo, it's going to be absolutely the same. I did have a question about the auth package here, the auth kit. Is that, as far as when you're using it with Appwrite, you have the auth kit. What about other methods? What about database, file storage? How are we able to work with that? Are we using custom endpoints, or is there an SDK that we can work with? Because I know we have the Flutter SDK. Does that work with Flutterflow?
It actually would, since this auth kit uses the Flutter SDK under the hood. You can, and the way our SDK works is it persists sessions and whatnot into a cookie jar, if I remember correctly, and then serializes that into app data. So you can directly use the Flutter SDK as well, and it would also go to that app data location and pull out the session and have that to use. This library, this Flutterflow library, is only authentication. It's kind of our first dive into building this integration with Flutterflow. We're also working with Flutterflow team. This is kind of new on their end as well, having libraries for people to use. So this is kind of our first step. Once we get more feedback on this, we might make some modifications to improve this, and then build a separate library for databases so that you can have the same type of drag and drop stuff to interact with Appwrite databases instead of having to manually write code to pull data and whatnot.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, is how far are we taking this? So in theory, you have full flexibility. This drag and drop feature, that's a nice bonus. Right now, it's just the auth kit, but it seems like if there is adoption to it and it makes sense, we go for databases and other services. And yeah, as you mentioned, we worked with the Flutterflow team. So this is a deep integration. Like both sides are connected very well with this. So we're definitely synced up there. You mentioned deep linking. How I know React Native seems to, we've had issues with that in the past. It's a little bit challenging. Do we have any issues with that here? And can you summarize deep linking real quick, just at a high level overview, just to kind of explain where this issue comes up and maybe how this solved, not this, but how we've solved it in general?
Yeah. So deep linking is a way to have someone open and dive into an app onto a certain page or some sort. And this is typically, let's say someone is reading an email and they see maybe a link for a Twitter, an X status post. They tap on that, and instead of opening up the web site for that, they get routed into the X mobile app. That's how deep linking works. It has morphed quite a bit over time in the whole mobile world. Started with kind of a custom URL scheme. So instead of having HTTPS, you'd have a custom scheme that goes into the app. Nowadays, there are recommendations about using universal links for deep linking, which is having HTTPS whatever, and then it can go into the mobile app or it can go into the website if that doesn't exist. We do, for React Native, it was kind of one of our most recent SDK releases. after we saw a lot of frustration with using the web SDK. And we're still working on cleaning up some things because of how React Native does deep linking, and especially on the different platforms that React Native supports. You can run on web, you can run on iOS, you can run on Android, you can run it via their Expo Go, or you can run it via kind of more like a native app. So there are a lot of different ways where you can run it, and we want to make sure that it is smooth for all of it. So we're still ironing that out. For this one, for mobile, I'm not exactly sure how it works. Let me double check the auth kit. I know we have sign in with email. Yeah, we don't have OAuth for this. If we see a lot of demand for it, we can look into trying to implement something like that.
Oh, there'll be demand for OAuth. That's anytime we add an authentication, the next question is, do you have sign in with Google? Do you have sign in with Apple? So I'll just tell you
Yeah.
right now, that's going to be requested.
One of the other things that we're doing with that is we want to go down the route of supporting kind of native OAuth. So if I'm on a mobile device, I have a Pixel, so it's an Android device, deeply integrated with Google. So now with native auth, you can kind of use the operating system's authentication. I'm signed in on my phone with my Google account. So the OS can prompt up and say, you're signed in on Google on your device. Do you want to just use that session to log in? And so we've seen high demand for that. There's a kind of a better experience as well with going that route, rather than what we do for most of our mobile apps today is kind of using something like a web view to have the user sign in. It takes them out of the app a little bit. So we're looking into providing a better experience using that native route. And so stay tuned for what we come up with for that.
Exciting. How about OTP, passwordless sign in? That's like you said, it's only sign in with email right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye out. If you're interested in those type of features, submit a GitHub issue and for requesting that feature, and then we'll see where the demand takes us.
Awesome. Yeah, I've from the YouTube comments, I've seen more demand for Flutter Flow than I have for Flutter itself, and maybe that's just because there's more marketing and hype around it. I'm not sure, but I always see Flutter Flow and over Flutter. So maybe it's because anybody who's a Flutter developer already has more understanding of how the functionality works, where this is a little bit new. They're trying to figure out how one or the other work, or how these two work together. So that might be the question there. But I feel like if I'm going to start with Flutter, it's probably going to be in the Flutter Flow area. My biggest issue was Dart. I can't find a reason to want to learn Dart. Like, there's languages that excite me. Go is one I don't use that actually seems kind of interesting. But Dart, it's like the use cases are limited. I don't want to offend any people who use it, but
I love Flutter. I love Dart. Flutter itself is very much like React. So all the things you learn while you're learning React, you can take that and apply it to Flutter. With Dart, though, Dart is the language that's used when you're building Flutter apps. It's very much like TypeScript in the sense that it's there's types and whatnot. There's type checking and stuff like that. It's a bit stricter because TypeScript is only during compile time or so, transpile time. So it's a little bit stricter. Dart is a little bit stricter than TypeScript, but also the other thing is like the tooling around it. I don't like having to look for, should I use prettier? Should I use biome? Should I use this other thing? Like, what formatter should I use? What linter should I use? The Dart ecosystem, the Flutter ecosystem kind of has that already in place. and it was reformatting all my stuff automatically. It looked great. I didn't have to mess with that at all. My IDE showed opening and closing things automatically out of the box. I didn't have to deal with any of that stuff. So it was just a really pleasant developer experience for me.
What's your biggest argument? I know we're going to jump off topic, so the demo is complete. Now we're just going to rant a little bit. What's your biggest argument for Flutter versus React? And would you propose Flutter over React Native, I guess not React, to somebody who is already a React developer? So for me, I just got into React, and it made perfect sense. It's like developing a React app. And the limitation that I found, or I guess the part that was confusing, is that you feel like you're developing for the web, or React Native is still kind of focused in that area, where Flutter is focused on mobile over anything else. Is there an argument to say this is why Flutter is still better? Because you made some to me, but I'm curious what you would say publicly about that.
Yeah,
You're definitely an advocate. I have a buddy just like you who just raves about Flutter, and I cannot buy it.
So the question is Flutter versus React Native, right? And why I would go with one or the other. So I first dove into this probably like 7 or so years ago. And I wanted to dive into mobile development. I wanted to make a mobile app, and I was faced with that as well. Should I go with React Native or should I go with Flutter? And also, I guess the preface is I want to be able to deploy to both iOS and Android. And at that time, React Native and Flutter were both popular. There's also native script or Angular side of things. I'm not exactly sure where that has taken off to, but React Native and Flutterfly. And I actually went down the route of building kind of an MVP of my app in both React Native and Flutter. And the thing I ran into a lot when I was doing the React Native side of things was that, like you said, a lot of things that I found online were more geared towards React for web rather than React for mobile. Libraries weren't as extensive. They didn't quite work for React Native. They just weren't available. So that was one thing that was a little frustrating for me. The other thing also is kind of the ecosystem. Expo is great. So Expo is kind of the platform or so around the ecosystem around React Native. When you go in and set up a React Native project, you'll get recommended to use Expo for it. They do a lot of middle.
It's like Next.js to React, but for mobile, for React Native. Like Expo, even the React Native team recommends you use Expo. It's like the framework around it. Plus, they have like the Vercel to React Native as well.
Yes. So if you're all in on that, if you're okay with that, then that's great. If you don't want to go down that route, you might run into issues as well, because there might not be as much support for things. Not as many people are using it, so you might not find resources about it. And when it comes to deployment, you would use their platform as well. And I didn't quite like being tied into that. You can, kind of set up your own build infrastructure, whatnot, but then that was a lot of extra work to have to do. And then on the Flutter side of things, kind of the opposite, where if you're building a mobile app, because Flutter started out as mobile, if you're building an iOS or Android app, you have tons of resources for that. If you're building a web app or a desktop app, you might not get as many resources on those things. So because I was building a mobile app, I found a lot more resources and whatnot. All the dependencies that I was installing, they were all there and working great for Flutter versus as I was doing for React Native. So that's kind of my take on it. I think React Native has grown quite a bit. Expo team has done so much. They've added so much more. They've even added routing now as well, kind of like with
Yes,
Next.js
Expo
for REST
router.
based. Yeah. So there's a ton that they're adding there to make React Native better. So it is better now. If you're all in on that, then that's great.
So the inverse argument can be made with React Native and React kind of focusing on the web. Flutter is more focused on mobile. I have a question about Flutter for web then, because I mean, I definitely don't think you'd go Flutter web if you were just building a web application, right? That doesn't seem to make sense. Uh, how do Flutter web people see that though? Because from what I've seen, it's still like, okay, it's cool that it supports that, maybe for something simple, but for any serious application, we're gonna go Flutter for mobile, and we're going for, you know, whatever framework we want on the front end, whether it's React, Vue, or anything like that. Whereas with React Native, I've kind of seen people go that route where they can push a React Native site far because it is native for the web. Now it's not as native for mobile, but it can kind of work. So there's this trade-off, but I feel like from my perspective, React and React Native kind of win because they kind of, I guess, encompass both ecosystems a little bit better. Whereas Flutter for web, from what I've read, is not necessarily recommended. Do you feel that way too, or do you feel like it's gotten better over time? Because my research is about a year old on this, and every argument I heard was, don't really use it. Like, it's there, but you shouldn't really use it.
I wouldn't say don't use it. The Flutter team has made improvements for Flutter Web. So I think first when it came out, it was bad, performance-wise and whatnot as well. Uh-oh, am I still on? Okay.
Yeah, I had a cough, and then I didn't realize that was my thumbnail.
So yeah, Flutter Web wasn't as good before. Kind of similar to how React Native for mobile wasn't as good before. Both teams have been working hard to improve both areas. So even with Flutter Web, there have been improvements, different rendering engines or so to improve performance and whatnot. So there's definitely improvements. I think there are some things that you do have to consider more when you're going from mobile to web. So it's a matter of kind of the developer and them knowing to take that into consideration when doing it, more so than anything.
Interesting. Yeah, have we seen it used at scale? Like, is there an example that you can never point to? Just curious. I know I'm putting you on the spot because I'm basically making you the Flutter expert that knows everything about it, but I do like to hear a Flutter person's perspective because it's usually a hill that people die on. But I'm like curious if anyone, you can argue for it, but would you actually use it, or has it been used? I know Arthava mentioned, React Native, you can add apps to your fridge, your TV, I mean, anything, right? Like, pretty soon our toilets will be talking to us. And React Native seems to work very well across all ends.
Yeah, I don't know of one off the top of my head that has gone to the website, and I've seen articles before about people switching to Flutter for mobile and that working well. I'm not totally sure on the web side of things.
I was hoping I could find a quick example of it, but for the most part that I see, it's usually smaller apps. That's interesting though. It's a conversation that I or a topic that I wouldn't mind exploring a little bit more. I think just from YouTube content, from the demand for it, we'll definitely have to dive into that. I typically have to be interested in something first. So when I'm asking these questions, I'm probing. I'm like, give me something that excites me about that language or framework. Like Go, for example. Like, I think the first time I fell in love with Go, because I didn't care for the syntax, it just didn't seem like that cool of a language. But then I used it with our functions when we released Appwrite functions, or what do? We improved the cold start time, and I saw how fast it was. I was like, that's reason enough for me to fall in love with it. It's something that can actually hook me. So I'm always looking for that. But if we have any questions from the audience, I know we're going to have a delay here, but if some questions pour in, we can try to answer those. Guide them towards Steven probably for Flutter, because obviously I'm the one trying to learn myself. But if nothing comes in, I think we can probably close out here. And I just want to throw in the reminder again for tomorrow. Danny Thompson, Quincy Larson from Free Code Camp, and Leon Noel. It's going to be a fun stream. And on Friday, we have, it's going to be a bunch of Appwrite heroes. And I believe we're going to do some giveaways. We might spin the wheel. I need to talk to Laura about that and see how that's going to go. It's going to be a little bit more interactive, but that's going to be a lot more casual. More people on the stream, less focused. We'll recap the announcement of the day, and then we're just going to have some fun with it. So this has been fun for me to host. I really enjoy doing this. The more interaction I get with the audience, it definitely makes it a different experience. So I'm not sure if I like this or Discord. Actually, what's the recommendation, Steven? How do you like it? Chat, what do you think? Discord or YouTube? Because I know Discord seems a little bit more personable.
I do like that we were able to use this on YouTube and whatnot. It's a lot of times people have that issue with Discord where they ask if it can be added to YouTube or something if they miss it or so.
Get a recording, yeah.
Yeah, that's always been the issue with Discord. So I like that that's available on YouTube here.
Yeah, I definitely like that part too. Except for yesterday's stream, I had to unlist because of the technical difficulties. We had two technical difficulties in a row. I think today went decent as far as I think my mic is good. I didn't notice the last one until after. Like I turned on the stream because I always re-listen to myself. I need to see like what I need to remove from my conversation and such. And I heard that audio. I was like, oh no, this is bad. But yeah, let's see. Adita says biggest complaint we had on Discord was that content could not be retained. Yeah, there's a way to record it. It could be limited. Maybe we can try to stream it in different ways. Ebenezer, YouTube has disadvantages. When is Appwrite going live on Twitch? And what we need for that is we need a personality. We need somebody to do that, and I don't think that's me. I like to teach. I like to get on YouTube and have conversations, but I'm no Primogen where, like, I notice if you're on Twitch, you need to be a personality, and that
What you talking about? You've done those 12-hour live streams.
See, but that's me, working on something. You can, I don't know. We'll see. Yeah. For anybody that doesn't know, I did 2 12-hour live streams and 1 10-hour stream. My goal is still a 24-hour stream. I definitely want to try that. It's weird because what happens is by hour 6, you're exhausted, and then slowly your energy actually ramps up because you start seeing that hour change, and you're thinking, okay, I'm going for a record, and then you just run on adrenaline. But then after, it's a horrible night's sleep. I can't sleep after. Yeah.
Oh man.
So with that being said, yeah, let's call it here. We're nearing in on the hour, and there's no reason to bug Steven more if we don't have to. I guess we'll answer one more question. How do you survive? I don't know, actually. I lose my voice after, so I guess it doesn't. It's just it gets raspy during the stream, and then it swells up after. So yeah. All right. Well, in that case, let's call it a day. Wrapping up day 3 of Init 3. Make sure to turn on the notification bell for tomorrow. You don't want to miss it. And see you all next time.